All right. I guess I'm gonna turn off. Well, if you want to turn your thing off, that's fine. I'm gonna leave mine on. But basically, I'm gonna record this so at least you guys know. Um, looks like we probably have most everybody we're gonna get. Thanks for joining. So my name's Godfrey Nolan. I work for a company called Resell at Sea, based out of Troy, Michigan. We do tons of different drone stuff for lots of different companies, and I've been running this because I know there's lots of new people because you're interested in ATAK, but I've been running this meetup. I think this is our 27th meeting. We're up to, let's see, do a bit of news first. We're up to 575 members now, which I think is great. What I thought would be a pretty small audience, just we're going to talk about news, introduction to ATAK, the ATAK architecture, the environment. We're, talk about what you need to get going, talk about the plugins themselves, why plugins are so cool. I love the way that plugins work. I like the architecture. There's a couple of things I like about drone programming. One is the way how it's so easy to customize. Somebody asked me something. Nope, how easy it is to customize QGC because of the way they've set up their custom framework. And the other thing I really like is about the ATAK plugins. Just basically being able to use ATAK and then do whatever you want on top of it. Depending on your ability to program an Android, I think it's great. So there are two plugins we're going to talk about. I probably should have reversed these because the Hello World plugin is all things to all people. So it is not what I typically understand as a Hello World plugin. It's basically all of the different functionality that you can do with an ATAK plugin. So while that's cool, it's not a good place to start because there's just too much going on. But it's something that I think is really useful if you want to dive into the different areas, such as the maps, heat maps. They have a heat map, they have routing, they have overlays, lots of different stuff. And then I'm going to do a much simpler plugin, which is leads on from what we did last month. So last month we did an intro to making a Android MAV SDK client. So I basically took the code that I had there and I'm using that with the plugin template and then just basically displaying positions. So we're running a PX4 simulator, and then it is pulling in the position. So I'm going to show you how to do that. And then I'm not really going to talk about deploying plugins. I think some of this stuff, when I started getting into it, I started realizing, wow, this is getting too big. So what I'll probably do is do more of the same in the second meeting. So I'm not going to talk about ATAK server tonight. We will talk about that in the August meeting. There are about half a dozen other plugin examples out there, which I didn't even have time to look at. I think we'd be on for 3 or 4 hours. We're going to do this. So I think the best thing to do is to just take that and just move it to the August meeting. So we'll look at the other plugins that are out there, and there's some really nice ML ones. And we'll look at the ATAK server. What can we do? Because currently what we're doing is we just have one single ATAK client. Obviously, the beauty of ATAK is that you have multiple things communicating, all getting the same kind of understanding of what they call situational awareness. So I want to see if I can connect to a ATAK server and then just show how to do a simple plugin where we are talking. We're talking to more than one ATAK client. So this month we're up to 575 members, which is great. Thanks everyone. I did put a question in a while back about if somebody else wants to do a talk in the future. We've done that probably 50% this year. So if anybody wants to do a talk and has anything that they're interested in the drone world, the drone software world, let me know. I'm probably going to hit up the people who said yes when they signed up, see if they have anything they want to talk about. I'm just about to start teaching as well. So I'm going to be teaching a Gen AI class in Kettering. So my time is going to be a little more limited. So you'd help me out if you do that. It'd be great. It's good publicity too as well. The other news is looks like Watts Innovations is closed, which was a huge surprise to me. So Bobby Watts is going away. If they're going to do something else, don't know what that is yet, but they are no more. So the Watts Prism and the other drones, or a lot of the drones that used to be used, I think still are, with Drone Up, with the what's happening in all the different Walmarts. So I'm wondering if that's going to be something that has a huge impact on what's happening in the industry. If Watts Innovations is closing, is that a bad thing? I would see it as a bad thing, but I just don't know why it happened. It's kind of scary when it comes to the industry. And then the other thing that is huge over the last month or so is the DJI ban. So looks like, well, it definitely went through the House. So it's gone through the House of Representatives here in the so here in the US, for those who are not in the US, basically what people are trying to do is they're trying to do the TikTok for DJI drones and ban them. I'm not going to make any comment on whether that's good or bad. It just is. So it's gone through the House of Representatives. It has to get through the Senate. So I'm assuming that's probably going to happen because it's not a rider. It's in the main bill to re-up the funding for the Army. Don't know what that's going to mean, whether it's going to be we have a ramp off or it's going to be immediate. But it's certainly going to have a huge impact on first responders, which is kind of the target for what we're talking about with ATAK tonight. So that's kind of another worrying impact on the whole drone software industry. The August meeting, like I said, I was going to do something completely different, but when I was doing this over the last week or two, I realized that this is huge. And I'm skipping a whole bunch of stuff. Like I have a next slide, which is just all about ATAK, which is normally when I see ATAK talks, they tend to be all about, hey, here's what ATAK is. I am just going to give you kind of the basic overview, and then start talking about how to get the plugins working, and rather than anything specific about ATAK itself. So in next month's meeting, like I said, we're going to probably look at, this is a client server. I haven't done anything on the server, so I'm going to look at the TAK server. I'm not going to have the meetup about setting up a TAK server. I'm just going to use a commercial server like Sidex and use that, and then figure out how to do the messaging between multiple ATAK, maybe ATAK, WinTAK, ITAK, whatever. And then go through the rest of the plugin examples, because somebody has gone through a hell of a lot of effort to do this, and they're really good. So I'd like to give them their due. Okay, so history of ATAK. So ATAK, it's an Army thing that started off. It's called the Team Awareness Kit. I think it was called the Tactical Awareness Kit because when it was part of the Army, there's still a lot of there's still a lot of military influence on what's going on. But on my side, I'm typically just doing stuff on the first responder side. Excuse me, the first responder side. If you do want to get involved in that, basically go to tac.gov. You usually need a sponsor from one of the from the Army, from one of the Department of Defense, in order to be able to do that. Basically, but you can still, if you don't have that, you can just create your own plugins. And then we'll talk about the deployment. That's the other thing. I'm not talking about the deployment today. We'll talk about that next month too as well, because that can be interesting, because typically you can deploy them on Google Play, but you also a lot of times want to deploy them on tac.gov, and there are certain restrictions that you may or may not be aware of. Okay, so we have the history. Started off in 2000s. US Air Force started it. The CivTac was released, I don't know, what's that, probably about 5 or 6 years ago now, which is the civilian version. So that's cool. So everything was open source. That means everybody else could do the same thing. So it's great. So there's a lot of resources out there. There's people, doing all sorts of different stuff. But just because you can go to GitHub, you can see lots of different plugins. You can either just copy them or create your own thing, or merge the two together and come up with weird and wonderful stuff. What we've done is mostly on the drones, no surprise. So we've done work with a couple of counter drone companies. We've done work with just doing an ATAK. Oh, okay. Sorry about that. Got nobody helping me tonight. And then the situational awareness. So that's the big thing. So, the reason this was invented in the first place is so that everybody who is on the field of battle, because it started off as an army thing, knows where all the friendly forces are, and if they're producing information like, I don't know, heart rate or whatever else, you can see what's going on. You can connect to IoT sensors. You can connect to the drone cameras if you use the UAS plugin tool. So it basically gives everybody a common view of what's actually happening in the field of battle. Everything is built around mapping. So typically what you have is you have a mapping screen, and you can have, it can show you different views of whether it's a school, whether it's a hospital, whether it's just when you're firefighting. A lot of that's been happening lately in California. Plus you can, add different maps and different overlays, and get to see, by putting in tags and different things, getting to see exactly what's going on, where the drones are, where the airplanes are, etc., etc. And then lots of different communication features. So you can send instant messages, share files, talk, lots of different stuff. It's a modular architecture, so it's using Android's module design, which is pretty cool. So I haven't quite figured out how the plugins are plugged into the ATAK, but I will talk about that a bit more next month. It just looks like it's using modules, but like I said, it's cool. So essentially what you have is you install the ATAK, the base ATAK, and then you install your plugins on top of that. System requirements, it'll run on lots of different things. We're talking about ATAK specifically, so it'll run on a phone, it'll run on an Android tablet, but there's also other things as well, so that you could have, it can run on Windows. There's a WinTAK. There is a iOS version. I'm always told that people think it's kind of like several versions or several levels below what the ATAK is, but there is ATAK if you're on iOS. And then, so platform compatibility, oh, my first typo. So, sharing the information across different teams who are running different WinTAKs, ITAKs, etc., etc. And then, of course, you can send the info to the TAK server and send it to other things based on what you want to do with the information. So this is kind of the way that a lot of people use ATAK. So you basically set up your own network using maybe Gotenna or whatever mesh system, Meshtastic thing that you can set up. If anybody's interested, I have a whole list of different things, but Gotenna is kind of like the go-to. So you basically need to have some sort of a Wi-Fi network that's going along, or some sort of communication, so these things can talk to each other. So you could have, a family on a day out with ATAK running on their phones, and so long as you have Wi-Fi access, you can share information. Or you could have a whole bunch of people in firefighting, and so long as that there is, maybe FirstNet from AT&T, if that's out there, they should be able to communicate with each other. The other way that you can do it is that everything can talk to the TAK server, and then you can pull in all sorts of other information. You can do machine learning on the edge. You can do machine learning on TAK, on the server itself. And we're going to look at that a bit more next month. Not really this month, just didn't have time. So the plugins work on top of the base ATAK application, which you can find at Google Play. You don't need a tak.gov login to do any of this stuff. If you do, then you get more, but if you don't, it's not really a problem. You can just go download ATAK Civ. You can start playing with the plugins now. The ATAK Civ source code is out there on GitHub, and we're going to talk about that. So you don't really need to be in the tak.gov world, because you can just, like I said, download the ATAK application, the core application, Google Play. And then you first really need to install ATAK, and then install whatever plugin you want to install on top of that. And similarly, when you're developing the plugins, you need to have the ATAK core SDK as the root, and then you're working as an Android app underneath that in a plugins directory. So what's the purpose of the plugins? Why are we using this? Because they extend ATAK's functionality. So the needs of the police is different from the needs of first responders, is different from the needs of somebody who's just trying to use this for an industrial use, for example. And then we have a plugin ecosystem. So there's there's a good 2-3 dozen things out there. There's probably a lot more, but when I look at what's on Google Play, or if I look at what's on the ATAK.gov, there's a good 30 out there that do lots of different things, data analysis, mission planning. We did one for a competition, which is how I got into this in the first place, a NIST competition, which was sensor integration, which I'll talk about just a little bit later. And then the whole thing about customizing ATAK with plugins. So you can add lots of other systems and tools. So, it's Android. So you can make API calls if you need to make API calls. So you can integrate systems. You can, a lot of the stuff we use for sensors is MQTT, but because it's Android, there's no reason why you can't just do a straight API call or an RX Java call to anything that you want in the back end. And then use that information and display it in whatever way that makes the most sense for your audience. So this is the base ATAK application, which you find in Google Play. I put all the resources right at the end of this. So I will publish the recording tomorrow. I will also publish the slides. And then usually what we do is we take the information and then generate a blog afterwards, and that goes up on our website, reese.com. Either way, you first need to install ATAK, and then you install whatever plugin you want to install. We're not really going to talk. Here's a bunch of the plugins that I just took from ATAK.gov. There's voice, there's a chat, data sync, fire area survey. I'm not really going to talk about how you would install somebody else's plugin. We're going to talk about installing the plugins that we create. So you can see here, there's 30 plugins. I'm sure there's a lot more from what people have done. Just seeing the volume of plugin information that's on LinkedIn, it's probably a lot more than that. But if you, at the very least, you can go out to ATAK.gov or Google Play, and you should be able to get at least a couple of dozen out there if you want to play with them. The one that, because we're a drone company, that interests us most is the UAS plugin tool. So this is done by Power, and then essentially that sits on top of the app and of the ATAK app. And then if you're flying a drone, you can connect it to a DJI drone, an Autel drone, a Parrot drone, that kind of thing. And you can get, so that's where it's cool. So here you can see, this is the weird icons they use. They use NATO icons, and that's the NATO icon that they use for a drone. But you can see the video from the drone here. So it's pretty cool. So not only are you getting to see something from the 50,000 foot level, now you're getting to see something from the 400 foot level or 400 meter foot level. So some excellent information, and you can, a lot of the things you can do here, you can also do, like if it's a thermal camera, you can turn that on, that kind of thing. Okay, so this is what we did for the NIST competition, which we were just showing off the other day. So this is for Disaster City and Texas A&M, and basically what it's doing is it's pulling IoT data and it's showing that what the weather is. There's a seismic sensor here, and there's a fire alarm, so there's a fire, and you can see around the campus that there's fire. So I think plugins are great for integrating different sensors. So that's certainly something that I think is kind of core. We're actually working on this and trying to put it into a plugin. So I'm hoping by the end of the summer, one of my interns will finish this off so we can put it into Google Play. Because that way I can get to see more about the deployment process. So the Hello World example. So let me show you this first. Let me just get out of this. Okay. So if I go to, so this is the downloaded. Let's get rid of everything. This is the downloaded SDK. So within the downloaded SDK, and I'll show you where to get that in a second, and it's in the resources, there are two plugin examples. There's a plugin template, which is the really simple one that we're going to use in the second example. Like I said, it was kind of backwards. It doesn't really have anything into it. It shows you the way that ATAK works is that typically what you have is you have the map, and then you have a slider that comes out. It's just a fragment slider that comes out. It's called a drop-down receiver. And then you put your information on that. So you can put text, you can put links, you can put whatever you want. You can put the drone video just like we showed. So that's commonly the way it works. So you have the main map view, and then you have the slider that comes in, which is whatever information is. And then the hello world, this is the one that is the all-encompassing example that has all of the different examples that you might want to use. So basically what you do is you create a plugins directory, and then you just move these over here, and then we start to interact with them with Android Studio. That's really basically the way it works. You have to make sure that all the stuff is in here. There is an interesting PDF in here, which is talking about the different plugins and the different components. The most important things here is basically there are two contexts that we have to worry about. Basically, we have the context of the map. So anything that we want to do to interact with the map, which is essentially the outside world. So we have the map context. So for example, only a second. For example, in my second example, what I'm doing is I'm trying to communicate with the MAV SDK. The simulator, so basically what I do is I do all my MAV SDK code in the map view, because that's got the context, which is outside of to the outside world. And then the drop-down receiver, that's basically everything that happens with the right-hand side menu, which is where all the fun stuff happens with ATAK. But if you are, it's worth going through this just to give you a general idea. It's a little bit more technical than most of the information that I've seen around there. But the other thing that I think is absolutely amazing is these guys, Toyun, did a GitHub book with everything that you need to know about ATAK. So if you learn one thing, and this is in the resources too as well, from all the stuff that's going on, you really want to take a look and have a look at the amazing job that these guys did. So they break down everything. So, we have this is the demo hello world that we're going to talk about in a second. All about the different components. They even give you quite a bit about how Android works. So I have taught a couple of Android classes. So at its most basic, you have an XML layout, which defines what the screen looks like. And then you have some Java code or Kotlin code, which binds to the XML, and that's essentially how your app works. So the XML layout is what it looks like. And then you have your Java, your Kotlin code, which is in an activity, which basically says how you interact with what's being displayed. So what you write to the different widgets that you have in your XML layout. Okay, let's go back to where we were. Okay, so what we're going to do is we have to download the ATAK SDK, unzip, and create the plugins directory that I talked about. You need to create, in order to get this to the plugin to be able to be recognized by ATAK, you have to create a couple of key stores. You have a debug key store and a release key store. We're not releasing anything, so we're kind of like in the debug key store world. You have to add the key store locations to the local properties. I'm going to walk you through all of this. So it's a lot of information, but this is just an overview. Android is really finicky. So the main reason for that, I think, is because the Google folks do this amazing job of releasing new versions of Android. I don't know, seems to be every month or two. I don't think it's quite on a 6-week cadence, but it feels like it sometimes. So I was using Jellyfish, now Koala's out. Most of this stuff, when this was done, is probably, at least 3 or 4 versions of Android Studio before what we have available now. So if you just open up the plugin and start using it, it's not going to work because Android's going to bug you about upgrading all the time, but you can't because you upgrade, everything breaks. So you got to make sure that the Gradle plugin is at 4.2.2 and the Gradle version is 6.9.1. And then the first example, this is all going to be in Java, and then the second one's going to be Kotlin, because I thought that was kind of a nice way, especially the second one's easier. And then you have to update just a tiny thing in build.gradle. You got to make sure that you're using Java 11. So if you use Java out of the box, I've used Android Studio out of the box, you'll be using Java 17, I believe. So you have to kind of downgrade that to get it to work with the plugin. You have to edit the app configuration to work with a plugin. So in Android Studio, when you run an app, it assumes that you're going to launch an activity. You're going to launch the main activity for your Hello World example, the Android Hello World, not this Hello World example. And a plugin doesn't launch anything because it's pulled into the ATAK core app. So the ATAK core app's still working. Basically, what you're doing is you're telling the ATAK core app that, hey, I have this plugin and I want you to talk to it. So you have to change the app configuration so it doesn't try to launch anything, because by the default is it's going to want to, because that's the way mobile apps work. We have to update some build variants. It'll basically assume that you want to release a mil debug, a military debug, or a military release. We're on civ mil, or sorry, we're on civ debug and civ release. And then you want to install the ATAK APK. It's important that you install the one from the SDK and not the one from Google Play. And then you finally get to deploy your plugin. So let's get into that a little bit more. So if you want to get the Civ SDK, ATAK Civ SDK, so the URL is again in the resources, but basically it's github.com, Department of Defense, Android Tactical Assault Kit. Well, that's what it was. It's a tactical assault kit rather than our ATAK team awareness kit. So you download the zip file, you unzip it, and you get what I showed you just a little bit earlier. So you have to create your plugins folder because it's not in there. It's definitely worth looking at the ATAK plugin structure guide. Kind of reckon you should look at the Toyin website first before you do that, because that will give you a kind of a level of information that you need to know. Oh yeah, the other thing that I did too as well for this is all of these steps in here are in a GitHub repo that we put up on github.com/Reese, and it walks you through all of these steps. So so there's a README there which would basically tell you how to do that. And we have one of the examples, which is there's two branches. The main is just the plugin template, and then the MAV SDK is the one that has the MAV SDK integration. But all the information about what you're doing here. So we need to create, in order to get this to talk to ATAK, we need to create a debug key store. Somebody's got a question. Can you please share the link in the chat? Yeah, I can. Okay, now you've stumped me. ATAK tutorial. Okay. All right, so we have this key tool. So first of all, key tool is part of Java. It's not part of Android Studio. So you need to find where key tool is. So for me, it was in under program files, Android Studio, and I'm giving you the PowerPoint as well. So all the info I'm saying here is in there. So it's under Android Studio /JBR/bin. If you're using an older version of Android Studio, it's probably /JRE. So whatever reason, JRE went to JBR. And just make sure you add it to your path. And then what you're doing here is you're just asking it to create the debug key store and then the release key store. Frankly, I wouldn't really do much with the release key store just yet, maybe next month. Okay, so then this is the view within Android Studio of ATAK Civ, which is where I downloaded it. And then we have our plugins, and then I opened up Hello World. So that's what you do to get started. So then there's a bunch of things that you need to do to get Android Studio to behave and stop giving you errors. So we're just going to walk through those pretty quickly. First thing you need to do is go into your local properties and add the location of the TAK debug key file and the TAK release key file. Because in local properties, typically what you get is you just always have this SDK, so that Android knows what SDK to use. And then what we're doing here is we're just telling ATAK where to find the debug key store and the release key store. It won't build. Actually, it's the ATAK plugin. It won't build unless you do this. So by the time you're done, you should have something like this. Like I'm on a Windows box, so use the double backslashes. If you're on a Mac or Linux, it's going to be the single /. But you should get the general idea. So it's just whatever the path is, debug key store and release key store. Okay, so that's one of the things to get out of the way. The other thing that you want to do is you want to go to Android Studio and Project and make sure that your Gradle plugin version is 4.2.2 and the Gradle version is 6.9.1. It will annoy you constantly and bug you to upgrade. Don't bother, because you'll just end up in dependency hell. The other thing that we need to do is go back to Android settings. So go back to File, Android settings, go to Build, Execution, Deployment, Build Tools, Gradle, and then there's a drop down here that says what version of Gradle JDK you're using. So you want to use Java 11. If you haven't installed it, you need to install it, and then make sure that you point at it because it won't build otherwise. There was one little weird error in there are two build.gradle files in Android Studio. It always confuses people. Excuse me, there's one at the project level and one at the app level. The one in the app folder is what you need to change. This says def space get value from properties. But if you change it to external ext.get value from properties, that will make sure that you get the build successful message. So once all that's done, you should be able to build the code for the hello world example, and it shouldn't complain at all. You should be able to get the build successful message at the bottom. Okay, so because this is a plugin to ATAK Core, we have to change the app configuration. The most important thing here is you don't really need to change the name. You can leave it to app if you want, which is what it is at default. I just changed it to Hello World plugin. And then what is it launching? That's the most important thing. So normally what it would say is it's going to say whatever the default activity is. And the default activity is whatever the default activity is in your Android manifest.xml file. So that's usually where it picks it up. In this case, because we're a plugin to another app, we don't have a launch activity. So when this APK launches, it doesn't really do anything other than notifies ATAK that it's there, and we have to go pick it up by using the ATAK menu. Okay. A lot of times when I do this, I'll have a Hello World plugin and then a Hello World reinstall plugin because it can be really annoying to get rid of the plugin when you've already released it. And if anybody has any issues with that, I can tell them how to do that. It's pretty straightforward. In fact, actually, that's in the README if you want to take a look at that. Okay, so we have now, if we go back to where we were, so within our ATAK Civ, we want to get this ATAK APK. So this is the one that we're going to install on our phone. Now you can do a ADB install to get it on your phone from the command line. If you're not really used to ADB commands or you're not an Android junkie like myself, then it's just as easy to just email it to yourself and open it up on the phone. And then, you go through the rigmarole of saying, yes, I accept this app, because a lot of times Android phones will not let you install an app that's not coming from Google Play. But you can just basically bypass that, say, yes, I know what I'm doing, please install it. So this is what you're looking for. You're looking for this Android ATAK APK. You want to install that in your phone first. You do not install the ATAK APK that comes from Google Play if you're doing your own plugin, because we're in debug mode. If we're in release mode, we would do that, but we can't for the moment. It just won't work. Okay. And make sure that every other ATAK is installed, or whatever plugins you have, before you do this. And then basically what we do is we the last thing we have to do is change the build variant. So this will be mil debug. So the way you get to build variants, they're kind of hiding it now. So you click the three dots, it'll come up with build variants, and then you want to change this to civ debug, and you're good to go. So when you try to run it, essentially what you're going to get, it's the same thing about Android blocking apps. That didn't come from Google Play, so it's going to say an unsafe app was blocked. So you click on more details and say install anyway, and then it will install for you. So this is what the Hello World looks like. Also, I didn't give it in the resources because it's a really long link, but one of my developers walked through that whole process from start to finish in a single video, and that's in the notes in the PowerPoint, which I will publish tomorrow. So if you want to see this from start to finish and see somebody walk through the whole thing, that's there. So, okay, so we have this Hello World, which has got an awful lot of stuff going on. So I took a little bit of the video. So this is one that comes from the Toyon, which is just showing the different stuff. Still not really telling me anything. So I recorded this as well, which I was running the app on my phone today. As you can say, kind of the design that they have for ATAK, that's the only thing that's kind of clunky. It does really look, 1990s, give me back my CGI script here. But there's, you can change whatever you want and make it look a bit more presentable, but it does look like a 1990s website here. So we have, let's start that again. Let's go back to where we were. So you have all of the different examples. You have what the layouts are, big layouts, small layouts. You have route examples, drawing examples if you want to draw on the thing, notification examples, images and camera, speech to text, it does speech to text. And then there's whatever sensors, an accelerometer, navigation, hooking into navigation events. So there's an awful lot that's going on here. So I understand why the people who did the Hello World plugin in the first place did this. In fact, Parrot did exactly the same thing as well. They did their Hello World for the Ground SDK was huge. Yeah, and here I'm just showing you how to get back to that. Basically, yeah, we're putting in maps, so we can put a map in here, put in a test marker. I didn't have GPS, so it's not really coming in too well. Okay, so that's the Hello World. A lot of stuff. Okay. So I'm going to look at the code for that. Android Studio, it doesn't really work. Android programming traditionally was very much, we would have XML layout files like this. So here we have a linear layout, which is a scroll view within it, and a linear layout, and we have a text view that says hello world, and then underneath it we have long press a button for a brief description. So that's what you're seeing on the left hand side in the previous slide. That's why it's there. So basically what we're doing is we're setting up all of the different widgets to show up on that right hand pane that we showed there. And then before I go too far, let me go to my Android Studio so I can show you the code. Okay, so here is the hello world I was just showing you. Let me make sure you're seeing that. Yep. So here is the hello world I was just showing you. So we have, that's all of the different buttons that you can see what it looks like if we go to design. So here's all the different buttons that we just saw. So, but we have to do something with those buttons. So when they click on them in Android, essentially what happens is that you're going to go to the drop-down receiver. You have to have some Java code that tells you what to do with each of those different buttons when somebody pushes them. So basically what you typically have is you have some sort of a click listener. So when somebody clicks on it, you trap that event and then you do something with that event. So whether that's drop a marker on the map, or send a notification to somebody else, or start the drone camera, essentially that's what they all work like. So, but you can see here that there's an example for heat maps. So we have a GL heat map, we have a simple heat map. There are map screenshot examples, how to do different layers, download layers in this case, how to do notifications. Recycler view is basically a scroll view in Android. I remember back in the day that was the most complicated thing you could do in Android, but it's just a scroll view. We have routes, so if you want to do some routes, so there's speech to text, all the stuff that's gone for speech to text. So they have done, whoever's done this has done a pretty amazing job about getting all of the different use cases and functionality that you could get in here. So anytime that somebody's asking me how to do something, we just had a conversation about layers. I always go, or heat maps, I said, well, go check to see what's in Hello World and see if you can replicate it. And I would recommend that you guys do the same. I do not want to refactor. No. Okay. Back to where we were. And then here as well, this gives you a lot more of the information behind it, which kind of explains fragments and tabs. So basically what we have is the slider, the demo receiver that comes in that is our fragment. And then on top of that, we have different tabs, which is basically the different actions that you can do within the ATAK plugin. and also ATAK has a ton of that too as well. And then here it tells you about how different layouts work, relative layout versus constraint layout. Yeah, lots more stuff. What recycler view is, which I said, the one that I said was just the scrolling widget. I will tell you that most Android developers now do not work in Java and do not use layouts. They almost all use Compose, and then Kotlin. I don't know how Compose works with the ATAK plugins, but I will find that out in future and maybe talk about it a bit next month. Okay. So yeah, humongous credit to these folks, whoever did this, because it saved me a bunch of time. Thank you very much. Okay, the second example, which I said this was kind of bit backwards. I should have done this one first, but whatever. It's so essentially what we're doing is there were two templates that we had. So the first one that we had was the hello world, which of course, me being a developer thinks that's what I should do first. And then the other one was the template. So the template, the hello world is hello everything, and the plugin template is the real hello world. So all it does when you run it, plugin template, it will just give you this plugin template at the start. And then I thought, well, then this is supposed to be a drone software meetup. Everything I've showed you so far has nothing to do with drones, just about ATAK plugins. So I got to do something that's kind of drone related. So last month we did, like I said, this intro to MAV SDK. So we know how to call the MAV SDK, and we know how to be a MAV SDK client. And we're working in Android, so regardless of whether it's ATAK, we're still in Android, so we should be able to merge the two. So basically that's what we've done. So I created a simple layout to just show where the position is, and then copy the code that we did from last month, converted it to Kotlin, and then showed that, use that to basically be able to just figure out what the position was of the drone. So I don't have a drone that's flying here, but the same as what we did last month, it's a software in the loop. So it's really easy to get a PX4 simulator up and running. There's a headless one that I use all the time. It just, it's a one-line command. So that means I have a simulator that's running. So we have a drone, a fake drone that's running. And then I can just query it and ask it what its position is. And then we can just display it in our ATAK template. Okay, pretty straightforward. I think this one for people who are experienced with ATAK plugins, the hello world is the way to go. But if you've never done it before, I would recommend just using the MAV SDK branch on the ATAK tutorial that I just talked about. Okay, so what do we have to do? So the same as what we did before. I'm not really going to go through the stuff in gray. I'm just going to do this stuff in black. So we have to put our plugin template into the plugins directory. Probably should have called it something else, but I didn't. Think of this as a proof of concept. Add the following code. We have to create the XML layout for our position that we just showed. We have to connect to the MAV SDK server. So that's our PX4 simulator. How do we get that started up? What do we do? And then we have to read the position and display. So we basically read the position, all of which is, if you don't know anything about this, I would recommend going back and looking at the recording from last month. And that will show you how we used an Android client. We used one from Oterion, and then we created our own just to connect to the MAV SDK server and just display information like lat long and position. So we're just using the same stuff and porting it into this month. So we start the PX4 simulator, go through all the edits we did before, and then deploy the plugin. So, okay, so we have now we have in our plugin examples, we have our plugin template. We just copy that and bring it across to the plugins folder. And then if you follow the steps, you should see everything that, all the steps that we went through in the hello world, you should be able to see the same things. So what's that? So basically you create your debug and key store, your restore key store, you create your local properties, make the changes, make sure it's Java 11, all the stuff, follow those steps. So if you do that, you should see the following. The most important thing is here where we have build successful. So, and this isn't actually a build, it's just all the libraries have synced, but we're on our way if we see this. So now we have our drop-down receiver. So that's the right screen, the drop-down screen with the 1980s design. And then we have our map component, which is the map. So the map talks to the outside world, the drop-down receiver talks to the map. And then we have our main layout. So just like any other Android app, we have our resources and we have our Java code here. Although what I did was I changed the code to Kotlin. Don't know if I talked about that. Somebody else trying to get in. Okay, can't find my mouse. All right. Okay, so where were we? All right, so then I changed the plugin. This time, change it to MAV SDK plugin. So now everything's synced. That's great. So we should be good to go. So I haven't created anything. I haven't gone to my main layout. My main layout is empty. So what I want to do is I want to create the position. So I want the position to be linear layout. It's going to have a text view, and the text view is going to say the app name, which in this case is just plugin template because I didn't change it. So there's a strings folder. So in the resources, you have layouts, you have strings. So in the strings folder, there's an app name, and then there's a position lat long, and I had to add that to the strings folder too as well. Should be pretty common if you've done any Android development in the past. So then this is what my linear layout looks like. So it's great. So now we have our layout. We need to make it dynamic. So I want to make sure that this number is changing all the time and giving me my actual lat long. So there's a couple of things to do. So the first thing we did is we converted the code to Kotlin, which is, if you're writing in Android, if you're doing Android apps, Kotlin is, I don't think we would start a new app in Java now. I can't remember the last time we did. Sometimes we have to work with legacy code, so we do work with Java, but all the young Android devs, all the cool kids, they just use Kotlin and very little Java. So we have the plugin template. It's in Java, so I want to change it. So basically what I do is file code, and it has this really cool thing to say convert to Kotlin. So for whatever files you want to convert. So away you go. So we take our two files, which is the drop-down receiver and the map component, and we just change those to Kotlin. What else do I need to do? So I need to add a position here to, this is the parameters. So I'm adding a parameter. Position is a float object because it changes so much. It's two doubles, so they're a lot long. And then we are basically, this is our position view text, which is the thing I just created in the layout. And what I'm doing is I find that view ID. And then what I'm doing is I am changing the text of that to the new position string, which is whatever is coming back from my MAV SDK server. Okay, so what do we do? We change the code to Kotlin, added position parameter, added code to read the position, and change the text view in the layout to the updated value. Pretty straightforward. We go back into our plugin template map component. I'm going to change this to Kotlin 2 as well. Change one, may as well change the others. So I added a couple of variables for position, for the state flow. And then I know that when I call my plugin template drop-down receiver that I have a new parameter now that I need to add. So the MAV SDK will be in the ATAK or map context and not on the drop-down receiver because I'm talking to the outside world. Added the variables, line 17 and 18, and updated the call to drop-down receiver on line 29, and then the errors go away. Okay, well, the errors didn't quite go away because when I start to add MAV SDK stuff, I realized that in my dependencies, I didn't have the MAV SDK in. Again, if you go back to last month, you can see more about this. But basically, all I'm doing is adding the MAV SDK client and the MAV SDK server, and then I can start doing my fun stuff. My fun stuff is going to be adding. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to check to see if the MAV SDK server is running. So if you're used to Android programming, you will know that onCreate is the first thing that's always called in anything. So the first thing that I want to happen is I want my MAV SDK server to be running. I don't want to be clicking a button to start it. I know it's running because I've started it. It's on the command line. I want it to run the MAV SDK server and talk to it. Okay. And then here's the code for running the MAV SDK server. This was completely robbed from the Auterion example from Jonas Auterion. I hope I didn't screw up his name. Who works for Auterion. He's got a couple of really good YouTubes out there about how to use MAV SDK. Only thing I changed is the port here, 14550, which is the UDP port that it's listening on. So if I have my PX4 simulator up and running, it's going to be sending messages on 14.550. If it's sending messages, I can get the position. So I have this thing here where I'm basically saying, give me the position, give me the telemetry. So that's one of the MAV SDK clients. One of the functions it gives me is telemetry, and within the telemetry, it gives me the position. So it's going to give me update the position, every 500 milliseconds for wherever the drone is, and I can pull that up and I can display it on my ATAK plugin. Okay, so how do I get my PX4 simulator up and running? So this is all you need. If you've got Docker in your machine, this is the command for you. So this is a headless gazebo, PX4, and you just need to know what your phone IP is and your computer's IP is. I would not do this within WSL. If you're on a machine, I would just do it on a Windows machine. I would just do it from the command line. So get Docker up and running, phone IP, computer IP. You might have to open up firewall settings for 14.550 and 14.449 if you have issues, but you probably shouldn't have. And then your PX4 simulator starts. And we compile the plugin. We have already installed the Hello World, and then we have a second plugin. So if all goes well, use Android Studio to launch the plugin. Go to the plugins tab, see if it's loaded. If it's not loaded, load it, and then we should be able to start seeing the information coming up on our thing. I did record one. I guess it's not there. I actually recorded what was going on here. But essentially what's happening here is that we have this plugin template. It's just getting updated on a regular basis. So then that's our second plugin that we're going to do. Here's the resources. So the first one is, I want to put in this Ballantine one, because when I started doing this a few years ago, that was really the only resource that I could ever find. It's kind of a bit out of date now, but I put it in there because it taught me a lot. The Toyun this is the bee's knees. This is definitely where all the information is. If you're interested in learning anything more about this, CivTAC is a great resource for all of anything to do with TAC, ATAC, WinTAC. Also, it has a link to Discord. So if you click on that, you get invited to Discord. And then there's lots of information going on there. There's a plugins channel. There's a development channel. So you can get more information there. Here's where the ATAC core app is. Here's where the US plugin tool is if you want to play with that. Here's where you download the SDK. This is the tutorial that is basically how to get the plugin template up and running, and then there's another branch that has the MAV SDK in there too as well, all with a README in excruciating detail. That same Razat put together for me. And then the last one is we have our MAV SDK on Android, which is the blog from last month, which talks about how to do MAV SDK on Android. So if you want to understand a bit more what's happening with the MAV SDK code, so you can copy that too as well. And then, so we did 2 plugins, but there were really so many more interesting plugins to look at. So there's a convolutional neural network, there's fragments, food detector, TensorFlow, camera stuff. So I want to investigate these more next month. So next month I'm going to do ATAK plugins part 2, and then we're going to look at the TAC server too as well, because it's not just a client-to-client mesh. You can also have client-server, and then you can do all sorts of fun stuff with commands, cursor on target commands on the back. So what can we do with that? How do we pull those into our ATAK, and how do we create like a better experience, or a better way of seeing all the information that's out there in a really easy format? So I'm going to punt on setting up the server because I could spend the whole meetup doing that. I'm just going to use a commercial one. Okay. All right, let me get out of that. Yeah, so here's the different websites. So we have the Toyun one, we have our tutorial, there's main and there's MAV SDK, so that's where the MAV SDK stuff is. Thanks again to Zane. There is the CivTAC downloads under releases. So if you're here, go to releases. There you go. There's the Discord, so there's lots going on here. Development, plugins, TACML, all sorts of stuff. So lots of very helpful people. This is civtac.org, which has all sorts of stuff, great wiki, documentation. links to ATAK on Reddit, all sorts of stuff. So there's a ton of info out there. And this is the Ballantine thing, which is where I started my journey. So I wanted to put that in too. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing now. Well, I'm going to if I can find where my mouse is. And I'm going to stop recording.